In this tutorial, we're going to go over some basic lighting techniques. Now, first off, I want to show you that I'm using Autodesk 3ds Max 2015. And the reason I'm using 2015 is because I want to show you a little bit more for the lighting techniques. And version 2015 actually gives you more options for lighting. So we're going to go over the options that you would get in the version 2012 that you're actually using in class, but 2015 just has a little bit extra options that I want to actually show you. So first off, when you open your scene, I want you immediately to go to your render setup. So F10 on the keyboard, or you can hit this button here. And I want you to check to see which renderer you're using. Now it'll tell you which render engine you're using right at the top. Right now I'm using Mental Ray. So if you're not using Mental Ray, I want you to scroll all the way down to Assign Renderer. Now I put mine at the top so I don't actually have to keep scrolling down. It makes better sense for your render engine to be up here versus all the way at the bottom. Now in 3ds Max 2016, Autodesk actually incorporated this because of course it's a pain to have to scroll all the way down to change your render engine, which that should be always be the first option. So I've actually customized mine, and the way you can do this is you can just drag your tab here and you can put it anywhere you want. And I like to have my assign renderer at the very top because that's the most important one. So by default, mine is set to Mental Ray. If you don't have yours set, you can always click on here and change it. Um, I have some other render engines in here, V-Ray, Quicksilver, which is a newer hardware renderer. But for this tutorial, we're going to be sticking with NVIDIA Mental Ray. And version 2012 is just called Mental Ray. They don't have NVIDIA in front of it. So I want to go to the Global Illumination tab, and 3ds Max 2012 is called Indirect Illumination. And I'm just going to turn off Enable Final Gather. And I kind of want to show you what the lighting does in the scene. So on the Create tab, go to Lights. And we're not going to use photometric. We're going to use standard lights. So you have some different light types in here. And I want to kind of go over the important ones. Now, a lot of these are the same exact thing. Like the Omni, the Area Omni, and the Area, the Area Spot and the Target Spot and the Free Spot. Those are kind of the same. And then you have the Target Direct and the Free Direct, which are just the same type of light, but one has a target. And then you have the Skylight, which is pretty much an ambient light, which is going to cover the entire scene. And we're going to kind of go through and touch the four main types. So you have Omni, Spotlight, Direct Light, Skylight. Those are the four types. So since I'm using Mental Ray, I am going to use the Mental Ray Area Omni as my default light. So I'm just going to go through here and put some items in my scene. I'm just going to draw out a plane here. Now this is way too bright, so I'm going to change this to a neutral color, something like a gray, dark gray. That'll work. And I'm going to drop a box in the scene. Get a sphere. I'm going to do base to pivot, so the pivot point is at the bottom of the sphere. Going to make a cone. And this will serve as our base objects. Now you'll notice that anytime you make objects in the scene, your lighting is going to be based on a camera view. And what I mean by that is, as I rotate around my objects in the scene, you know that the shadows are following based on my camera projection, which is perspective mode. So this is the default lighting in Max, and that's not what we want, because when we go to actual render this out, if I hit render, you see that I don't get any kind of lighting information in here. It's kind of flat and it looks exactly like the viewport, except there are no shadows because I don't actually have lights in the scene. This is just kind of a visual display in the viewport. This does not pertain to the render if you don't have any lights in your scene. So we need to go through here and put some lights. So back to under the create, go to lights, make sure you're on standard. I'm going to use mental ray area omni. And as soon as I click in the viewport, your scene should turn dark. Now, depending on which version of Max you have, you might actually have to tell your scene to update. Now see, mine just updated now. It took a little while. So I'm going to bring my lighting up a little bit so you can actually see what this is doing in here. So you can see that I actually have direct control over the shadows now. So if I were to go and render this out now, you see that I actually have control over the shadows, and now there are shadows in the viewport. So let's take a look at some of the settings in here. So I'm going to go to the Modify tab. And the first settings is General Parameters. You have your light type. You can toggle it on and off. And then you have this little drop-down list for the 3 different light types that you can select. Now, I told you there were 4 when I said you can make a skylight, which would be the 4th option. That is its own separate type of light. And it's not housed in this category because these can be interchanged. The skylight cannot because it has completely different parameters. Now, by default, you have your shadow type to ray trace shadows. So you can see I can turn shadows on and off. You can make this a global setting, so this will affect all shadow types, but we're going to make this local. So I have a bunch of different shadow types in here, and because I have some plugins installed, Hair Farm has its own shadowing engine here, and then I have V-Ray in here. So I have these 4 extra shadow types in here. Now, when you have your scene, you're only going to have Advanced Ray Trace, Mineral Ray Shadow Map, Area Shadows, Shadow Map, and Ray Trace Shadows by default. So you'll have these options here, but not these options. These are plugins. Now, by default, you're going to have Ray Trace Shadows enabled, so we're going to stick with that and go through a few settings. So if I scroll down a little bit, you'll see that I have an intensity here. I can go through here and change the values in here. So the first option is your multiplier, and this is going to directly control the intensity of your light. Next up, you have the color, which is to the right of it, and you can actually go through and change the color of your light. We're just going to cancel that and leave it on white. Now, right below this, you have your decay. Now, realistically, lights have a range. They have a range of effectiveness, which is called attenuation. And right here, this is the decay type. So you have 2 options in here. You have inverse. Now you see immediately when I turn this on, the light dims a little bit, and then I get this little radius around. Now, this is your start radius for your decay. So anything that's not within this radius is going to decay. So you'll see that as I change this, it changes the fall off of the intensity of the light. And if I change the inverse square, it falls off even faster. So your light's going to decay really, really quick. So this is something like you would use for maybe a really less powerful light source, something like maybe a night light or like a really low wattage bulb. So I'm going to leave this on inverse. Now next up you have your near and far attenuation. Now this is going to directly change the shape of your light and your shadowing. So I'm going to turn both of these on to use. And you notice that my lighting updates. So take a look at the start. Now it's going to start at 0 and it's going to end at whatever value you have set. So this is going to be your 100% intensity range. I'm going to turn off inverse so we can see this better. So as I increase this, you see that my intensity range for 100% is going to change. So I'm going to set this to a value of, let's say, 150. And now from here, I'm going to go through and change my far attenuation. And you'll see this will give you like a fall off. You'll see that as I bring this value closer, it's going to start to make a hard edge shadow around here. And as I bring it outward, it's going to blur the shadow out. So if I put this value right on top of the other value, you notice that the spotlight is really hard edge now. So it actually turns your omni light into a spotlight. I'm going to turn this off so we get back to what we were. Whoops, not selecting the ground. So okay, to change this, I'm going to freeze my selection here. So I'm just going to right click and go to freeze selection. Now I can't select the plane at the bottom. So next up you have advanced effects. And under here you have contrast and softened edge. You don't really need to change these values. So you have diffuse and specular, and these are important values. Now, by default, everything is going to be diffuse. That's default lighting. Now, specular is going to change the highlights that are caused on the surface based on the lighting and the surface normals. So if I were to turn off specular, you see that that flattens out and there's no light shining on that little hemisphere. If I turn diffuse off, that pretty much eliminates your light. Now, ambient only, this is going to give you a different effect. Ambient only is going to actually brighten the entire scene. So if I were to render this out, see what we get. This makes your actual lighting pretty flat. Now only your objects are going to get shading, but you notice that the shadows are actually gone now. If I turn that off and render that out again, you notice I get my shadows back. Now under here you have projector type where you can actually project an image through the light. And we're going to go over this when we go to our spotlight. So we're going to skip that and go to shadow parameters. And on the shadow parameters, this is where you actually control your shadows. So by default, your shadows are going to be 100% black. So when I render this out, this is what I'm talking about. My shadows are completely black in here. There's no room in here for the shadows to be different shades. Now I'm going to unfreeze this so we can actually see the 100% shadows here. Because when I have this object frozen, you see it changes the surface, which changes the shadows. So I'm going to go to Object Properties, and I'm going to turn off Show Frozen in Gray and freeze it again. And this time, it's going to retain the color information. And I'm going to turn off Grid here by hitting G on the keyboard. And on the shadow color, you can go through here and change the color of your shadow. So you get some really different effects in here. Let's say I want some hot pink shadows. That looks weird, so I'm just going to put that back on black. Let's say I want my shadows to be less intense. You can go through here and change it from a value of 1, which would be 100%. Let's say half, 0.5. You see that my shadows get a little bit less intense. So now they're not 100% black. So I'll leave that there. And Next option is your map. You can actually put a map in here and change the way your shadows actually look. So when I click on this, this is going to bring up the material map browser here. And I'm just going to put a standard map in here. So under map standard, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to put something like waves in here. And I'm just going to hit render just to see what this does. Now you'll see that my shadows look a little bit different now. Let me put my intensity back on 100% just so to show you this a little bit better. There we go. You see the shadows, they look a little bit different and it's being controlled by this map. So let's actually see what this map is doing. I'm going to hit M on the keyboard to bring up my material editor. Now I'm using the Slate material editor. And what I want to do is I'm going to collapse all of these. I'm only focused on maps right now. I'm going to bring over my map here and kind of just drop it right in here. And this is going to make an instance. Hit OK. So all I see is this map here. So when I double click on this, this will give me my parameters for my map. So by default, it's set to object XYZ, and this is pretty much procedurally generated map coordinates. So this will be dependent on how your object is viewed by the camera. So this will give you some very unrealistic results, unfortunately. But since we're changing the type of our shadows, that's not very realistic either. So I'm just going to kind of show you something that this does. So I'm going to change the tiling of the shadows so you can see this a little bit better. You see that this little image right here updates. So if I put that back on 1 just to show you again. Whoops, not 11, 1. 1, 1, 1. So that's like the tiling of it. So this is going to increase the density of the tiles here. So let's leave that 5 and 1. Let's get those type of shadows in here. I'm just going to move that off to the side, and we're going to hit render again to see what kind of shadows we get. Ah, look at that. And we got our shadows that are kind of striped a little bit, but we still kind of got this white part in the shadows. So in the map, it's actually showing the white part for the shadows. I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to turn on light effects shadow color, hit render again. And now we're getting a little bit of a different result here. So this is how you can go and change the shadows. I'm just going to clear that out. We don't really need that now. Next up, you have atmospheric shadows, which you're not going to see unless you have atmospherics selected. So we're going to go down to ray trace shadow parameters. Now this right here is directly tied to whatever light type you have selected. So you see if I change this to something like mental ray shadow map, now my lighting options actually completely changed. I'm going to change this back to ray trace shadows. Turn this back on. So you have your ray bias and you have two-sided shadows. It's going to give you a different effect in your render. You won't really see it in the viewport, but you'll see it sometimes in the render. Now you're not going to see two-sided shadows because I don't have lights going from different directions. The next up you have atmospheric and effects. So let's take a look at what this is doing. This is going to be a post effect. So if I go to add, go to lens effects and hit OK, you'll see it drops this into this menu here. I'm going to go to setup, and this opens up the environment and effects menu. And this is where you can kind of go in here and play around with some different effects. So let's say I wanted my light to have a glow effect. I would go to the left side here and select from the menu, hit the right arrow or greater than arrow, and you'll see that it goes over to the right side. And then once I'm over the right side, I can actually go through here and change the parameters. And I'm gonna pick which light I want to use. Since I only have one light in the scene, I'm just gonna have it affect this light, which is right here. And I'm just gonna hit render to show you what this does. So it renders out, and then it does a post effect. So you get this little glow effect for your light, and this is pretty cool if you're wanting to do maybe some particle effects, or you're making something like a sunlight. You can get some different effects in here. So I'm not going to go through all these effects because we're just kind of doing an overview of it, but you can kind of go through here and play around with it to see some different effects. So I'm going to load in a preset, and the way you do this is you go to your parameters and then you hit load, and let's do something like raise. And you'll see that it put a lot more from the left over to the right because this is a preset. So now when I go back and hit render, see what effect it gives. It does render and then post effect. Boom. Now that's really, really bright. So of course you can go through and change the settings on this. You can go through, change the size and overall intensity of those effects. So that's something you can do individually. So I'm going to get rid of this for now. I'm going to delete it. And you see that it deletes over here as well. So next up you have area light parameters, and I have these set to on. Now when you tell it to show icon in render, now it'll actually show up in the render itself. You see this little dot right here? This is your light. So you can go through here and change your radius to something like maybe 20 so you can see it a little bit better. And as you render this out, you see that this is actually changing the shape of your light. Now, I want you to notice this. What happened to the shadows here? You see the shadows are starting to blur out now. So I'm going to change this back to 1. And look what it did. The shadows are hard edged again, which are ray trace shadows. So this is going to directly affect the way your shadows are perceived in the render. So I'm going to turn this off for now because we actually want ray trace shadows, which are going to be the hard edge shadows. So next up you have some indirect illumination parameters. These are the default global multipliers. And as you change these values, it'll change the overall energy, the cosmic photons, which are pretty much, this is going to affect how light passes through transparent objects or reacts to reflective objects. And then you have your global illumination photon, so this is going to change the intensity of that. But these are pretty much global values. They don't need to be changed. This is something for if you want to fine tune and get a much more intricate result. And next up, you have your light shader. So when you have this enabled, you can actually plug in a different light shader for this. So let's say I'll plug in something like a light point. And let's see what this actually does. It gets rid of the shadows. Change this to ambient reflective occlusion. And now this changes the way the shadows are being perceived in the render. Change to one more. And that completely blacks out everything. So I usually never use the light shader at all. I'm just going to clear that out just so it's back to normal. All right, back to normal. And we're going to change our shadow type to mental ray shadow map. But before I do that, I'm going to get rid of this light. And I'm going to choose a different light type this time. We're going to use a target spotlight. So the way you create your spotlight is you click and drag out. And this is going to react just like you would if you were creating a camera. So you drag out for your target area. So I'm just going to move this light up a little bit. Now right now I'm not getting any lighting information at all. And now it just updated. But I don't have shadows, so I need to turn shadows on. Now the reason this is doing this because I have adaptive degradation on. I'm actually going to turn this off so I get my lighting effects instantly. So we're going to change our light type to mental ray shadow map. I'm going to go down to spotlight parameters. And most of the settings are going to be identical for each three light types with a few exceptions. But the spotlight, you actually have spotlight parameters. Now, the first option you have is show cone. Now, by default, if I'm not selected on the light, you see the cone effect goes away until I select the light. But if I want to always see the cone effect, I can tell it to show cone. And now the cone will stay there if I'm not selected on the light. Okay, so next up you have Overshoot, which is going to completely eliminate the spotlight effect. So this is just going to basically turn this into an omni light. And we don't want to do that. And then you have your shadow, your hot beam, and your fall off fill. So this is going to change the area of intensity. So anything in the hot beam is going to be 100% intense, and then you have this fall off area where the intensity is going to fall off. Let's take a look at what this is doing in the render. You see that you're actually getting this blurred edge around here, and this has been affected by the shadow type. Now I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so we can actually see this a little better. Whoops, deselected my light there. Hit render so you can actually see. Now take a look at our shadows. Now they are not crisp like they were before when we had ray trace shadow selected. Now with mental ray shadow map, what it's going to do is going to give you a soft edge shadow. Now right now it's really blotchy and it looks a little weird. So we're going to go right to our mental ray shadow map parameters. And by default, your map size is set to 512. Now I'm going to drop this number down to something really low, like 64, so you can actually see what this is doing. Now you see my shadows are really, really blocky now. So this value here controls the overall size of your shadows. So this is going to be basically your anti-aliasing for your shadows. So I'm going to bump this up to a really high value at 4096. Hit render again. And now we're getting better shadow results, but they still look a little bit blocky here. So in order to change this, we need to go to our samples. And I'm going to bump this up to a higher value, something like 32. Hit render again. Now it's starting to blur this edge around your shadows. Bump this up again to something like 64. Now it's really starting to blur out. One more, 128. So now it's really starting to soften the edge of the shadows. So next up you have sample range. I kind of skipped over that. So let's change this value. I'm just going to add a 0 in there so we get 0.001, hit render. And look what that did. It completely eliminated the blur for the shadow. So this gives you pretty much ray trace shadows. Now let's go back and delete one of these values and leave it at 0.1. Hit render again. Now this really softens those shadows. Really, really softens the shadows. So this value here can give you very, very drastic changes. So I'm going to set that back to 0.01 by default. Now you have the bias here. Now what the bias is going to do is control where your shadows start from your object. So right now it's starting from the base of the object, but if I were to go through here and put a value of, let's say, 50, notice that the shape of the shadow is changing a little bit. So as I increase this value here, now I completely blew out my shadows. So I put that back on 0 and see it's changing the shadows. So I really never use a bias. You don't really need it. So next up you have transparent shadows. I'm going to show you what this does. Let's make this box transparent. So a couple ways you can do this. You can right click and go to Object Properties, and under Rendering Control you can toggle the visibility. Now one is going to be a visibility of 100% opaque. So I'm going to make it transparent by dropping this down to something like, let's say, 0.2. Hit OK. You see it makes the object transparent in the viewport. So I'm going to select my light again, but I don't want to lose this view that I'm having right here. So I'm going to go to my tools and go to Light Lister. And this will bring up this menu here. And this will give you a basic overview of all the lights you have currently in your scene. So I have the spotlight here. It shows you my multiplier, shows me the color, the shadows, the shadow type, the map size of that shadow, and a few other options in here that you can change on the fly. But if I hit this little button here, this will select the light. So now we're back to the lights, and I'm going to hit render just to show you what this does. Now right now you don't see anything happening. Use transparent shadows, turn that on. Now you notice that this renders a little bit slower when I have transparent shadows turned on. Now you notice my box isn't actually transparent, and that's because I need to put an actual material on it. Changing this render mode here isn't really going to do anything unless I make the visibility 0. Now if I make it 0 and then render it out, now what it's going to do is it's going to completely eliminate that object. And that's not the effect that I want. I want to make it transparent. So I'm going to put this back on 100. And I'm going to open up the material editor again. Here we go. We don't need this map anymore, so I'll delete that. I'm going to go to my move this over a little bit so we can see. And I want to put this material directly on this object here. So a couple ways you can do this. You can always hit the assign material to selection, or you can take this little node here and drag it to your object, and then you'll see that it'll update. Now in here, I want to change the opacity to something like 50%. And now let's try to go back and render this out. And now we're getting some transparency. So now as you can see, your objects are transparent, and look at the shadows. It's actually changing the intensity of the shadow. You can see here you have two different intensities, and it's based on the transparency of this object. Now, if you don't see your object being, your shadows being transparent, it's probably because you need to enable transparent shadows. So if I turn this off, you see that it renders out completely black. But it decreases the render time. So you notice that when I have transparent shadows enabled, that it takes a little bit longer to render out your shadows. So that's just something to be mindful of. So I also said that we would go back to projection type. So I want to show you what this actually does. If I go to under advanced effects, we kind of skipped over projector map. I'm going to show you what this actually does. So let's say I want to project an image through the light. I'm going to turn on projector type, and I'm going to go to bitmap, and I'm just going to find an image to project. Let's say I want to project maybe this brick pattern here. Now, I loaded this map in here, but you didn't really see anything update. Now, this projector effect, you won't see this in the viewport, so you actually have to render this out. Voila. What it did, it kind of projected that image through the light. So now you're getting the brick pattern in here. So this is a really cool effect. Now, in addition to this, you can actually change the aspect ratio of the actual projector map. So let's say I want to project an image like maybe like a movie. So I'm going to change the scene up a little bit. I'm going to actually make a screen for us to project on. Get a plane in here, go to my front view, and I'm just going to drop something in here, something like this for a screen. And now I'm going to make this light point toward the screen. So I'm going to move this over a little bit. Going to make sure this is centered on the x-axis. Select the target, and we're going to point it directly at the screen. Make sure that's centered. Then we may have to go through and change the actual fall off hot beam here so it actually matches up a little bit better or something like that. And now let's go and actually change the image we want to project. So let's get something cool to look at. We can download some images or choose something like this little creature here. So if I go back and hit render, you see that it projects that image directly onto that background there. Now I want to change the size of this right here. If I change the type to rectangle, you see that it gives you a rectangular pattern. Now aspect is set to 1, but I can go to bitmap fit and I can select that same image again. And now what it's going to do is it's going to match that aspect ratio of that image. So I'm going to change the way my projector screen is going to look to actually better match up with the projection. There we go. So something like that. Match up on the screen and now hit render. So now you're projecting the image on the actual screen. So this is a cool effect. And I'm going to drop another light in here so you can actually see what's going on. Let's do an Omni light. Now I don't want this to cast shadows. I want shadows to be off, and I want to change my light type to ambient only and decrease the multiply to something like 0.2. So what this is going to do is it's just going to bump up the lighting in the scene. I'll show you what this does. See, now we can see everything else in the scene because I kind of put an ambient light in there. So what it's going to do is just bump up the intensity of the entire scene. So now we see the light. Now, in addition to this, I'm going to turn that off and kind of show you what this does. I'm going to change my spotlight again Actually, let's not do spotlight anymore. Let's do directional light. We need a brand new light in here. So get rid of that, and we're gonna move on to the next light type, and we're gonna make a target direct, the same way you made the other light. So now you have a target directional light. Now again, like the spotlight, you have parameters in here. Turn on shadows for directional parameters. There we go. You have a hot beam and a fall off. Now I want you to notice what just happened here. Now the Omni light was the last thing I did, and the multiplier carried over. So I'm going to put that back to 100%, and I'm going to make sure my parameters are set like the way I want them. I want to also change the circle back to circle instead of rectangle, because I don't want to project the bitmap image anymore. And I'm going to put this directly above the scene. And I'm going to show you something cool here. So let's say I want to make a shaft of light here. What I'm going to do is put an atmospheric effect on this. So under atmospheric, I'm going to add, instead of lens effects, I'm going to use volume light. Hit OK, go to setup, scroll down to atmospheric, and I have some parameters in here to kind of change the way this is going to look. Now by default it's set to a really high filter for your shadows. I'm going to put this something on low just so this renders out faster. And now when I hit render, you'll see that this gives me like a little halo around my cone of light, and it has an intensity in the middle of it. So you can go through here and directly change the density. Let's say if I put it to something like 1, hit render again. Now it changes that. So this kind of gives you a really cool spotlight effect. Now you can go through here and add noise to this. Say if I change the amount to 1, you see it'll make your spotlight a little hazy in there. So drop that down to 0.2. There we go. Kind of get a different effect. And you can kind of go through here and play with some parameters to get different effects in here. But this is basically what the spotlight volume lighting does. Kind of gives you a cool shaft of light. So I'm just going to delete that off. And now I want to show you what indirect illumination does, because up to this point we've been using direct lighting the entire time. So let's actually change up our scene a little bit. I'm just going to go to reset my scene. And I'm just going to make a couple objects in here. I'm going to make an indoor object. So I'm going to make a box here. So this box is going to serve as a interior room. Change the width of this a little bit. Now I want to be able to see directly through this. So I'm going to go to right click, object properties, turn on backface cull. That's step 1. Step 2 would be to flip the actual normals. There's a couple ways you can do that. You need to convert it to editable poly and tell it to flip, or you can go and add a normal modifier on top of the stack, and it will flip your normals. And you'll see I'm kind of getting this weird glitchy effect here. That's because this box and this plane are sitting right on top of each other. So I'm going to move the plane down just a little bit to something like -0.1. Now it's a little bit different. I'm not getting that effect too much, so there we go. So I'm going to put some objects in here. Let's go with some cylinders. Now I want to see what the size of this actual box is. So I'm going to go back to my parameters. I want to change the height to an even number, let's say 170. And I want to carry this height over to my cylinders here because these are going to be act as little pillars in here. So 170. And I'm just going to kind of copy these a few times, make an instance. And we're going to drop a light in here. I'm going to use spotlight. So instead of using the target spotlight, we're just going to use the free spotlight. So now I'm just going to click in here. And what it does is it puts the spotlight directly on the floor. I'm just going to bring it up. Now we know that the height of 170 is what I need. So you can see all I see is just this little spotlight in here. But I want to make a few more spotlights. I'm going to turn on shaded mode to eliminate my shadow so I can actually see what I'm doing here. And I'm going to make a few copies, not a copy, but an instance, 2 instances of this light. So the cool thing about light instances are that when you change one light, you change them all. So if you're doing an interior scene and you have the same type of light, you don't really need to make copies of your light. You just need to make an instance of your light. And I'll show you what this is going to do. Turn back to realistic mode. So let's say I select this middle light here. I can go through, turn shadows on for one. And I'm going to go to the spotlight parameters. So I'm going to change my shadow map to mineral ray shadow map. Go to my spotlight parameters in here. And I'm going to change the fall off here. You see that this actually affects the lights, all of the lights at the same time. Now I want to put a flat material on all of these. So I'm going to go to my material editor and just drop a standard shader in here. And I'm going to apply this to all of my geometry. So I'm just going to go to my selection filter, hit geometry, hit Control A to select everything. Go back to my material editor and assign the material to selection. And it gets everything. So now we're back to lighting here. So you see that my lights in here, when I reset the scene, it enabled indirect illumination. So I'm going to go back and turn that off. So this is the result that I actually want to see. Now my shadows right now, they kind of look crappy. And that is because I need to turn the sample range up a little bit. Let's turn it up to something like 64. Make the map size something like 2048. So it's a little bit better. Let's go with 128. 4096. I'm starting to smooth those shadows out a little bit. But I'm actually going to change this back to ray trace shadows. So we get a much faster result. See how fast that was? So this is pretty much direct illumination. You see that it's only illuminating what the light is actually touching. Now, when I go back to my render dialog here under globe illumination, well, under yours, it will be indirect illumination. Turn on final gather, which is going to bounce light around the scene. And you can change the number of bounces here. So I'm going to put this on a value of 2. Hit render again. And you'll notice that my scene gets a lot brighter on the inside. Now, indirect illumination is taking the lighting into effect and the actual surrounding environment. So what it's doing is it's taking light and it's bouncing it off in different directions. So this is going to brighten your scene up a little bit. So this gives you a cool effect. So if I were to go and, let's say, put this light over here, let's change it up a little bit, see what that does. Let me get some really different results for lighting. Now you'll notice that you're actually getting a little fall off here. You're actually getting a soft edge shadow on the wall, but on the floor you're getting kind of like a hard edge shadow. And that's just kind of the nature of the spotlight. It's just something that it does. Now if I put this spotlight a little bit closer to the wall here, bring this out again. Now the closer the light is to the wall, you'll see the edge start to harden a little bit over here, and then as it falls off to the bottom, it's starting to get uh, a little bit blurred out. So the location of your lighting is definitely going to change the shadow. Now you've probably been wondering what all this stuff down here is. These are some of your render options presets. The first one here is your anti-aliasing. You can see if you look closely that my render, it looks a little bit jagged, but if I were to go through and change the quality here to say 1, now it's going to start to increase the anti-aliasing of your geometry, and it's going to make your overall quality a little bit sharper. So this is pretty much going to sharpen everything. Now your shadow precision, this is going to change how precise your shadows are. Now as you increase this, it's going to definitely jump the render time. But you see it kind of smooth out a lot of those shadows. And your final gather actually has uh, a setting here too. And by default it's on draft mode, but you can change the setting to something like maybe low. I probably wouldn't put it any higher than low because this is definitely going to jump your render times. And you see it's taking a little bit longer. Now your glossy reflections and your glossy refractions. Now I don't have anything reflecting in the scene, so I could turn this off and turn this off. And it's not really going to make a difference because I don't have anything reflective or refractive in the surface. I mean in the scene. And here you see you have your final gather bounces in here. So let's change up the scene a little bit differently. I'm going to put a hole in this wall, and I'm going to get rid of these lights in here. So I'm going to do a Boolean operation. Go to standard objects, make a box, and I'm just going to put it right on the surface of this wall here. I'm going to do the auto grid. Now because I have my normals flip, it's going to draw straight through it on this wall. So what I'm going to do is unflip my normals first. Then I'm going to try drawing this again. And now it's drawing it on the wall that I want it to. So I'm just going to make this interpenetrate the wall a little bit. Select my object. Go to compound objects. Go to Boolean. Pick my box. Now, notice what this did. This cut out the box here, but it kind of left the inside in here, and I don't want that in here, so I'm going to change my operation to cut. And let's see, remove inside. There we go. That's what I want to do. I want to remove the inside of this. So I'm just going to collapse that to editable poly because I don't want to change the shape of that anymore. And I'm going to flip I don't want to flip the normals. That's what I don't want to do. What I want to do is I want to create 2 different faces in here. I want to make the inside visible and the outside visible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a shell modifier in here. So now what this does is it makes my walls 2-sided. So I have 2-sided walls now. But I want to make an inner amount, not an outer amount. So now my walls have thickness. So if I were to go in here, you can see my walls actually have thickness now. So as I increase this value, is going to increase the thickness of the walls. I don't want to make it too thick. And I want to put a light casting straight through this window. Increase the size of my plane here. And let's do a directional light. Say target directional. I want to direct it toward this. And we're going to bump up the parameters just so it covers the entire area. So I'm going to go to fall off and hot beam. I'm just going to bump all of this up just so it blows out the area. Well, not too much. Bump it up a little bit at a time and have it fall off. Something like that. Turn on shadows. So now we're getting the light coming through the window and it's making a little square there. Now I want to see from inside of this box here. So in order to do that, I'm going to make a camera. I'm going to go to my top view and go to wireframe mode. And we're going to go to cameras. I'm going to create and I'm going to make a target camera. Click and drag that out, and I want to draw it facing toward where this window is going to be. Back to perspective mode, and I'm going to put the target look at to be kind of right there in the center of the window. That's what I want the focal point to be. And I'm just going to bring the camera up a little bit just so it's not sitting on the floor. Now I'm going to change up my viewport a little bit so I can see this a little bit better. Now by default I have the quad menus in here, but I don't actually want to see that. Now, since I'm using 3ds Max 2015, I have this option right here to change my viewport layout. So when I click on this little tab here, and I'll have some extra options in here so I can change my layout. Now I want to do a top and a bottom layout. So in this bottom layout, I want this to be my perspective mode. And on the top layout, I want to be my camera view. So in order to switch this to camera view, all I have to do is just hit C on the keyboard, and it'll automatically look through the camera. Let's turn this off of wireframe so we can actually see. And here's another thing. When you change your viewport, your lighting and shadows are going to be set to default lighting. You want to change this to scene lighting. You'll see that when I change it to scene lighting, I actually get my light source and not the default lighting. That's what I want. Now this camera view looks a little bit weird. It's kind of zoomed really close into that window. So I actually want to see what the render looks like itself. So whenever you make a camera, click on a camera label in the viewport and tell it to show save frames. Now this is actually going to show you what the camera is actually going to see in the render. So I'm just going to render this out a little bit. I'm going to change my settings a little bit so it takes less time, because I don't need everything on high quality. I'm going to do draft settings for that. So now this renders out a little bit faster. And you can see you have the light coming through in the scene. Makes a little square here. But the light is not really filling up this room here. I can go through and change the number of light bounces to maybe something like 5 and render this out again. Oh, just rendered the wrong angle. So in order to stop this from doing this, I want to always render the camera view. So when I have this view selected, I'm going to go to this little lock icon right here. Now, it's also on your render frame window. So you'll see right here, I have my camera. I'm going to lock it to that. So no matter what view I have selected, it's always going to render the camera view. So it's still really, really dark in here. And the amount of light that I want to come through is not really being apparent. So we're going to use a different type of light to get this to work. So instead of using a target directional light, we're going to use the last light type, which is a skylight. So I'm going to go into lights, lights standard, and I'm going to drop a skylight right in here. Now immediately you see what that did. It made the entire scene really bright. Now basically what the skylight is doing is it's making an ambient light. So if I were to go and actually render this out, see what this is doing. Now it's going to take a little bit longer to render this out because the skylights are really intensive on the render time, but you'll see that I'm starting to get a little bit more light in the scene, and you can see that I have shadows right here, getting a little bit more lighting in here, lighting more information in here. So this is still a little bit dark, and I still want it to be just a little bit brighter in here. I'm not really getting that full intensity of the light that I want. I want more light to be pouring through this window. And right now it's just really dark in here. It's just too dark. I want to increase the intensity of this light. So I'm gonna turn this off. I'm gonna let this stop this from rendering because this is taking a really long time to render. And I'm just gonna get rid of this light. So now you see what it does. It makes everything completely flat color. Render this again. Now it's going to take about the same amount of time, even though I got rid of the other light, just because the skylight just by nature takes a while to actually calculate. So I'm going to bump down the anti-aliasing a little bit and bump down the shadow precision. And this should help the render time a little bit. So you can see it's running a little bit faster now. That's kind of what we wanted, but still it's really black and dark in the scene. So we need to fix that. So in order to do this, we need to actually make a different type of light in here. Now instead of standard, I'm going to go to photometric and I'm going to use a mental ray sky portal. And this is kind of a cool thing. I'm going to go to my, let's see, this is the right view. So if I look through here, the right, this is the right side. Let me turn off this so we can see it. I want my sky portal to project through this window. So I'm going to go to my right viewport by hitting V on the keyboard and go to right view. And I'm just going to kind of draw this over the window. Let me go to actual wireframe mode so you can see what this is actually doing. I'm drawing out a box and I'm going to make it a little bit like the shape of the window. Now you can see in the top view and the camera view what this is actually doing. This is actually bringing a light source and it's telling it where to beam through. So now if I go back to render, you see it's starting to get a little bit brighter in this room. I'm getting a little bit more light coming through here. So just like any other light, you have some settings here. I can actually go through here and change the multiplier to something like 3. And you'll see that I'm getting more light pouring through that window now. So this is giving you a really cool effect. Now there's one more thing I want to show you about the actual skylight. So I'm going to put some different objects in the scene that just kind of show this. The box, put another sphere in here, base pivot. Now, what's really cool about the Skylight is you can kind of simulate an environment. You don't need this direct light anymore, so I'll just delete that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to plug a high dynamic range image into this Skylight here. So to do that, now by default your sky color is set to white, but I actually want to put a map in here. Change this to bitmap. It's going to ask me what I want to select. I actually have some HDRs in here. Now I want to simulate this image right here. This is an outdoor scene. You see it has a sky. I'm just going to tell it to open, hit OK. Now look what it just did up here. You see the lighting color change up here in the viewport. If I go back to render this out, you see that the lighting's a lot different now. You're starting to get a blue tint to the lighting. And if I look out the window, there's something back there. So let me change the intensity of, I think I deleted my, yes I did. So I accidentally deleted that mental ray sky portal in there, so I'm going to put that back. I'm going to go back to my right view. Just draw that back over the window. I'll move this where it needs to be. Increase the intensity, something like 5. Render this out again. So there we go. So you can see there's a sort of like a bluish tint to the scene, and that's based on the actual map that I applied into the environment. I'm gonna move this out the way. Now I actually want to see what this is doing in the viewport. So I'm going to change to realistic mode. You see that this bluish tint has been applied to the scene. Now, this is an environment map effect. Now, you can't really see this in the viewport, but you can actually change it to do this. If I go to viewport background, go to environment background, you see that it changes my background to straight black, and that's what I have in the environment and effects menu. So if I hit 8 on the keyboard, bring up environment effects, you can also access it through rendering and environment. My background color is set to black, so I can change it to any color I want, and this will affect how it renders. Now what I want to do is I want to plug this map that I put in this light to my background. So I'm going to select this light and I'm going to take this HDR and I'm just going to drag it here, make an instance of it. And now if I zoom into this, you can see it puts this image directly in the background. So this is kind of simulating a lighting environment. So render this out again. And now you're starting to get a much better result in here. See what this is doing. Now right now this Veneray Scatter portal is actually in the way of my rendering. So you can actually change your light source to the scene environment, which is really cool. So this will give you some different effects by changing some of the parameters in here. So let's say I want to render from this view instead. I want to see what this looks like. I'm going to turn off my lock. So now it renders from what I currently am on. Now you notice what this is doing to Skylight is actually casting shadows. So because I have an image in here, and by default you see cast shadows is grayed out, it's automatically casting shadows based on this map here. Now if I want to go through here and kind of change some settings in here, I would do as we did before. I would just drag this map right into here, make an instance of it. So now we can see this map here. Let's go to view image. So this is what this image actually looks like. I can go through and change the offset, which is going to change the environment. So I'm going to move this off to the side so you can actually see this. Now I'm changing the offset value, and this is going to rotate the image. So I'll show you this. I'm changing the offset here, and this is rotating the image around. So I'm changing the offset on the U value, which is the horizontal value. So you can get some really cool effects in here. Now, one last thing, I'm just gonna show you something really cool that Mental Ray actually does. So let's say I want to go through here and I'm unsure about what materials that I want to use. I'm just gonna go to materials and Mental Ray. I'm just gonna use a standard arc and design material, and I'm gonna put this on the sphere. But I really don't know how this material is actually going to look, and I kind of want to change it on the fly, but I don't want to keep hitting the render button. I actually want to get a preview of what this is actually going to look like without having to keep rendering every single time I make a change. Now, 3ds Max 2015 introduced a really cool feature where you can actually get a render preview, a real-time render preview without actually hitting the render button. It'll actually update at every frame. So to enable this, you have to go to your render setup. And at the bottom, you see this little arrow here. Um, when you click on this, right by default, it's always on production render mode. I'm going to change this to active shade mode. And I'm going to hit the render button. And I'm going to put this right over here in the corner. So to show you what this does, I'm going to move this around. I'm going to move around my scene here. And you see that the render is updating as I move around. So this gives you a cool interactive preview of what your render is actually going to look like. So you don't have to keep hitting the render button. You can actually get a visual cue of what your scene is going to look like. So even if I move objects in the scene, you'll see that it updates the render. Now, what's really cool about this, let's say if I go back to my materials here, and I want to make some changes to this material, you'll see that as I change this material here, it's going to update in the render as well. So I can get a cool interactive preview of what this is actually going to look like when it's rendered out without having to keep hitting the render button. So as you leave this alone, you'll see that the quality is going to increase over time. So this is a really fast and cool way to kind of change up your scene, test out some materials. Let's say I want to use a template in here, maybe something like Chrome. See, updates in the editor, in the render. So this is a really cool feature. Now, again, you won't find this in any version lesser than 2015. So this is a feature that they added to 2015. Now, what this is using is mental ray for your active shade mode. So if I go into render setup mode, if I go to assign renderer, this bottom option right here, active shade mode, has to be set to NVIDIA mental ray. If it's set to anything else, it will not work. So default scan line will not work. It has to be NVIDIA mental ray. So this concludes this tutorial for lighting. Hope you learned a lot. If you have any questions, just ask me.